Welcome to the Behind the Frame podcast, hosted by me, Rebecca Yale. I'm a destination wedding photographer and educator working in the luxury marketplace, and on this podcast, I'll be pulling back the curtain, sharing what goes on behind the scenes working in the luxury wedding industry. Hey friends, welcome to episode 1. I am more than a little nervous here starting my own podcast. And since this podcast is going to be all about getting real and getting honest, I'm going to start right here, right now, and let you know I am completely terrified, but I am putting on a brave face and hoping that I get into the swing of things. But I wanted to put that out there at the start of this. I debated for so long what this first episode should be about, and after I wrote it, I kept saying, oh my God, does anyone really want to listen to me talk about myself for this long? And I got total imposter syndrome about talking about imposter syndrome and almost scrapped the whole thing. But you know what? Here I am putting myself out there. It is January 2024, and if any of you need a push to put yourself out there too, consider yourself pushed. Join me in the land of discomfort. It only hurts for a second. I hope. I'll let you know how I feel when this episode is over. So, this podcast is all about getting honest and getting real about what actually goes into building our businesses and achieving success. Whether it's those all-nighters, multiple 14 or 16-hour workdays in a row, time spent away from our loved ones, balancing work, life, health, and wellness, we're going to be talking about it all. I'm going to be examining the process of what goes into building a successful business as an artist and an entrepreneur in a holistic fashion, understanding that we really need those lows to get to those highs and that success isn't a straight line. Not to sound like a cliche, but sometimes we all need reminding that real life isn't about a destination. It's the journey that really matters. So I thought a lot about what this first episode should be, and I have so many big ideas that I want to tackle. Imposter syndrome, never feeling like enough, mental health, entrepreneurship, goal setting, searching for happiness. The list goes on and on and on and on. And I promise I'm going to make episodes about all those things, but I figured that a good place to start, and I'm going to touch on a lot of those things I just mentioned, is just introducing myself. I'm going to share my story of who I am and how I got here, and I hope you get something out of it. So whenever I'm on someone else's podcast, they always read the intro that I send over to them. And oh boy, I cringe every time because it's super cringy to hear someone say great things about you that you've written about yourself, even if they're facts, even if they're true. Every time I hear it and I hear it read out loud, I think, wow, that makes me sound so much cooler than I really am. That person doesn't sound like the Hot Mess Express who spilled her coffee all over herself this morning. Literally have a scratch mark from like I tripped and I gouged myself with my fingernail. Like I'm a mess. And that's how I think of myself because I, like many of you, I'm sure, struggle with imposter syndrome. And I feel really uncomfortable celebrating my wins, even though I know I worked really hard for them. I also think there's like the societal female thing to feel like we must always minimize ourselves and appear humble and never bragging. But that's another podcast for another time. But I also want to immediately follow up that statement about working hard for my wins by acknowledging that I realize absolutely how lucky I've been to have such incredible support network of my family and my friends that have all played a big part in me achieving the successes that I've had. But if you have been sent my podcast by a friend and you have no idea who I am, I'm going to be really awkward for a second and I'm going to read my own intro just this once. Rebecca Yale. Hi, I'm the problem. It's me. Is an internationally acclaimed destination wedding photographer and educator based in California. She was named one of the top wedding photographers in the world by Harper's Bazaar and Brides Magazine and has been featured in 100 plus publications, including Martha Stewart Weddings, The Knot, and People Magazine. Rebecca is dedicated to empowering fellow creative entrepreneurs to find success by making intentional decisions for their art and businesses. Whew. Okay, so now that you've gotten my bio and that awkward moment is behind us, I'm going to dive into my backstory and try not to feel too much like a Marvel character sharing my origin saga. So, if you had asked baby Rebecca what she wanted to be when she grew up, the answer definitely would not have been wedding photography. Actually, it was the boss, the boss of what I really have no idea. But as a child, when asked what I wanted to be, that was always my response, which I think through the lens of my adult brain means that I wanted to be in charge. I didn't want to be told what to do. Luckily, adult me understands better the need for collaboration, help, and support, but it is not lost on me that the desire for entrepreneurship and team leading has been in me since I was a child. I actually knew that I wanted to be a photographer from a pretty young age, but weddings were like the total curveball of my life. A wedding was the last thing on my mind for my personal life. I didn't get married myself until last year at 34, which for some parts of the country is totally normal, and for other parts makes me ancient spinster adjacent. But all that is to say that I was not the kid who dreamed about my fairy princess wedding. I dreamed about being a CEO and the best CEO in the world. I was a precocious kid, a total smart mouth who felt more at home with adults than my peers, my fellow children. I spent my childhood at a very small, very nurturing elementary school. And when I was starting my highly competitive, highly prestigious middle school that would become my high school as well, my parents were worried that I wouldn't make any friends. So they put me in summer school to meet people before term started. And I picked science and photography. And as cool as I thought it would be to be an astronaut or a marine biologist, I realized young to play to my strengths. And sadly, science was not one of them. But I fell in love with photography. I was that super shy and nervous kid around strangers, especially kids my own age. But with a camera in my hand, I all of a sudden felt confident. I was empowered. I became our yearbook photographer, and people started asking me to take their photo. And I loved that I could create something that made people feel amazing. I realized what a gift portraiture was, getting to show someone how beautiful they were and how beautiful I could make them through my lens. I followed my love for photography to NYU, and I had my sights set on being a fashion photographer. I went to the Gallatin School of Individualized Study and I studied photography, art history, and aesthetic philosophy. It's kind of like having an undergraduate dissertation. I grew up loving fashion and had fallen in love with the grand romantic work of Richard Avedon, Irving Penn, Annie Leibovitz, and Stephen Meisel. And I wanted to create magical images that transcended commerce and became art just like theirs. However, after assisting and interning for dozens of fashion photographers, I quickly learned that the fashion industry actually wasn't really the right place for me. I remember so clearly sitting in the back of a very famous photographer's studio, listening to him berate a model in front of me, in front of her, retouching the photos in front of her, and admonishing her for having eaten chocolate the night before because he could now see it on her thighs, which was more work for him in the studio and retouching. And I grew up in LA in the 90s, peak heroin chic, Kate Moss eating disorder culture, and I've struggled with disordered eating since childhood. And I could not believe that this attitude was just so blatant on sets. I had fallen in love so young with photography's ability to make people feel empowered and confident, but the fashion industry, at least in 2006, was the exact opposite of making women feel empowered and confident. So I did a total 180 and I decided that I wanted to be a documentary photographer. And I was studying in school how photography can motivate social change and change the way that we perceive the world around us. So I wanted to go work for National Geographic and nonprofits and save the world. I wanted to save endangered species. And I absolutely still love that work. And I loved working with some organizations like UNICEF and World Wildlife Fund. And I still do it when the opportunity arises. But I realized that that world wasn't quite the right fit for me either. I didn't want to be embedded in the field for 6+ months at a time. And while I love documenting, I really missed the art directing part of the job and all of the creativity that goes with it. So I'm now a year out of school. I'm living in New York City and I'm applying for grants to work on these long-term documentary projects. And in between them, I'm shooting portraits to pay my bills. I'm talking dog portraits, dating profile, LinkedIn, newborns, so many newborns, so many babies in so many buckets, city hall elopements, basically whatever would come my way. But I did not want to shoot full-scale weddings. To me, weddings felt akin to like Sears Portrait Studio, like so cheesy, so superfluous, not a place for a real artist or serious people who wanted to do serious things in the world. God, the self-righteousness of being in your early 20s. For any of you out there in your early 20s listening, don't take offense. I am sure that like a decade from now, I'll be laughing at myself in my 30s, but I can say for myself, I took myself way too seriously in my 20s. And Oh boy, did I get in my own way countless times. So if I can share any advice from here, have some fun. Life doesn't have to be so serious. As you probably cottoned on to this story by now, life is not about the destination of where you're going. It's all of those moments along the way of getting there. That's where the good stuff happens. That's where real life happens. Okay, but back to me thinking that working in weddings wasn't a worthy career. And to be fair to myself, weddings had been the butt of the joke in media for so long. I remember so distinctly the Friends episode where Winona Ryder was the guest star, and she was talking with Jennifer Aniston's character Rachel about leaving her job to do something really important and make the world a better place. And Jennifer Aniston was like, "Oh, wow, so what are you doing now?" And she answers, "I'm a wedding planner." And it's for a laugh. It's said just like that. And it's a laughable joke that a wedding planner is an important job, that it could have an impact on people. And that's the baggage that I, and I'm sure so many of my fellow millennials and Gen Xers, brought into the job when I started. When I moved back to my hometown of LA in 2015, I would talk to family or friends I had gone to high school with and told them I was shooting weddings now. And I would constantly hear, "Weddings? Why? What happened to National Geographic? What happened to Vogue?" And my heart would sink. And my inner child would want to scream, "I didn't fail and land in weddings. I chose this and I love it and I am damn good at it." Which, by the way, there's nothing wrong with failure. It's okay to fail at something and decide that it's not right for you and switch to something else. But okay, I have a lot to go over here. So I'm going to save the gentle reparenting of ourselves for a different episode. But during these days, my family would jump in and say, "No, no, 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 no. But she's a famous wedding photographer. She's a big deal." And it made me feel even more uncomfortable and like even more cringe, even though I simultaneously was super appreciative and grateful for them saying that. And I hated that I felt the need to prove myself and that everyone around me seemed to feel that need too and assure everyone that I was still impressive and I hadn't squandered my potential. It's this expectation of excellence that we all put on ourselves, and everyone around us feeds off that beast. But rewinding the clock back to my just out of college, self righteous, early 20s self, I wanted to make a mark on this world. And I did not think that weddings were a place to do that. And all of this attitude was coming from a person who had never actually been to a wedding as an adult. I was a flower girl when I was like 6, I think, for like a distant relative, but I hadn't been to a wedding since. But luckily, that all changed when I attended my cousin's wedding in 2011. And my cousin got married at their family's farm in Vermont, and she wore this amazing blue and white dress from Mark Ingram. And like these were the early days of Style Me Pretty when wedding details were like really stepping up. And I just fell in love. I followed around her poor photographer like a puppy dog, asking questions and probably driving her crazy. I got to witness for the first time that weddings could actually be everything that I loved about photography, wrapped up in this perfect little bow of a day. It was a fashion shoot and a portrait shoot and then fly on the wall documentary. And my grandfather passed shortly after that wedding, and those photos are now the last that my family has of him. And it gave me such a deep appreciation for how important wedding photos actually are. They're not silly, they're not superfluous. They are deeply important to the people that we take them for. And having shot hundreds of weddings now in my decade plus career, I appreciate that deeply. And I don't take lightly the gravitas of my job and what an honor it is that I get to do that and step into these families' lives on this incredibly important day. So that was almost a decade and a half ago now, and I jumped in and I never looked back. I decided that weddings were the place for me, and in particular, I wanted to work in the luxury wedding industry. Now, there's so much to say about the early years of my career and how I started my business and all of the horrible, horrible mistakes that I made along the way. And trust me, I can and will fill an entire episode just with that. But for now, I want to fast forward to about 5 years into my career. So as I mentioned, I had my sights set on the luxury wedding industry, and it was for two reasons. One of those reasons was that I wanted my weddings to feel like the same work that I would have been creating if I had stayed in the editorial world and I was shooting for Vogue or Condé Nast Traveler. I wanted to shoot impeccable design, fashion, culinary creations, floral installations, work at interesting venues and travel the world and collaborate with fellow artists who were creating this microcosm that I could step into and document. And I knew that where I really excelled was in the layering of all of these different types of images, the fashion, the still life, finding that decisive moment, and working in the market that would allow me to do so with the world's best vendors. And that was the luxury market. Now, the second reason that I wanted to work in the luxury market is, and this is where I'm going to get a little vulnerable, so stick with me, guys, it's because I wanted to be the best. I wanted to be the best wedding photographer in the world. And it's super easy for 35-year-old Rebecca to say that with a laugh. But let me tell you, 25-year-old Rebecca was dead serious about that statement and thought that that was a real thing, because let me tell you, it is not. You can be your best version of yourself. And I truly believe, and I teach, that you should have the skills to back up the statement that you are the world's best, because if you don't, you can learn it, whether it's the lighting, the posing, the workflow, like all of that hard skills, that's learnable. But the objective idea that there's one definitive best in the whole world that everyone has agreed upon is the best is absolutely ridiculous. I grew up in a very high achieving family at high achieving schools in high achieving cities. I am not exaggerating when I say that excellence wasn't considered a great outcome. It was the only outcome. It was the expectation. How much of that was put on me by my family and surroundings versus what I put on myself is, hey, that's what keeps my therapist in business. But the outcome was still the same. It was high expectations and the desire to be the best. My mother is an amazing glass ceiling shattering lawyer here in Los Angeles, and she was the ultimate example of success in my mind growing up. She was one of the first female partners at her firm, and she has spent much of my life on every best of list there is for lawyers in Los Angeles, and has helped and nurtured so many others in getting there themselves. And I expected the very same of myself. When I set my sights on being a photographer, one of the first goals of mine was to be on PDN's 30. Now, PDN stands for Photo District News, and it used to be the biggest publication out there for commercial and editorial fine art photographers. So for my 4 years at NYU, I had drilled into me by all my professors that getting on this list was my ticket to success. I would get in front of the best managers, agents, art buyers, editors, creative directors, everyone who would help me with starting my career had to be on this list. It was my ticket to success, and I was determined to get on it. And I was actually part of PDN's photo annual, which is a big contest they do, my senior year of college, for a photo that I took of a walrus. And I was the youngest person ever to be awarded in the annual category outside of being in the college edition category. And I felt so cool. I felt like hot shit at that awards party. And I was basically waiting for National Geographic to hand me my contract because, oh boy, was young Rebecca so naive. And that is not how it works. I was longlisted for that 30 in 2011, but I wasn't nominated. And when I transitioned from editorial photography into weddings later that year, I was devastated that I would never win the 30. But then I was instantly elated when I discovered that PDN had a sister publication, Rangefinder, and they had their own 30 rising stars. And I was determined to get on that list. Fun fact, I never did, but I won their annual in 2017, which was my first real gut punch of learning that no matter how much I achieved, I'd never feel like I had truly made it. And this is because the desire to be the best is a desire to be something that does not exist. I have a core memory of being at lunch with another wedding photographer right when I moved from New York to LA, and we were talking about our career goals. And I told him that I wanted to be the best wedding photographer in the world. And he paused. He asked me what that meant. And I was so confused. I was like, I want to be the best, full stop, duh. And he was like, but what does that mean? How do you judge the best? And literally, this was like mind-blowing concept to me. Up until now, it had never occurred to me that this wasn't a quantifiable thing. I had set my sights on a goal that was unachievable. Sure, there are like the best of lists and there's amazing publications that you can be in, but that doesn't make you the definitive best. There is no one objective way to be the best. And like, it sounds so silly to me now, but this was mind-blowing to me then. And I realized that I've been focusing like so much of my life on aiming my dart at a target that did not actually exist. And every time I achieved something, it never felt like enough because I was never achieving this elusive title of the best, because it wasn't a thing that could be achieved. Again, I could be the best version of myself and I could think I'm the best, but Could I like get the rest of the world to collectively vote and say, crown me the best? Of course not. Now, this need to be the best did serve me in some amazing ways. I made very intentional business decisions to prioritize getting where I wanted to go, which was the luxury market. So I made big investments in myself. I always brought along a big team and I shot more film than I could really afford to do. I purposefully earned a little less money for a while, knowing that I was investing in myself and my future and the opportunity to make a lot more money down the line. And I understand that that comes from a privileged place. And I was very lucky to be able to make those investments in myself. But there are lots of different ways to invest back into your own business, whether it's the slimmer profit margins for a while, taking the time to invest in education and product development, which in the wedding industry is your own skill set. Those investments do pay off. But when it's all being fueled by the desire to be quote unquote the best, the flip side of that desire is just a lifelong fruitless search for external validation. It's so much unfulfillment and so much confusion of why you're not happy. Because Lucy is constantly pulling out that football every time you go to kick it. And let's say you finally do kick that ball. Well, the goalpost has moved. I never gave myself any grace or any joy in my accomplishments because by the time I kicked that football and I had achieved one of them, I had already set 5 more for myself. So I was published in print in Martha Stewart for the first time in 2015, and I was absolutely elated until it came out, that is. And I saw that it was only 2 pages, and I saw that other photographers had 8 and 10-page spreads. Gone, poof, was that self-assurance that I had made it. And back was the imposter syndrome telling me that I hadn't, and I would really only ever make it when I had an 8-page spread. And not to spoil the plot, but let me tell you, fast forward 5 years to January 2020, and you will find me sitting in my therapist's office with a copy of Martha Stewart with 2 of my weddings in it, an 8-page and a 10-page, and I am crying my eyes out because I still don't feel like enough. I still don't feel like I've made it. But I'm jumping ahead. So let's rewind the clock and go back to 2017. I've now been shooting weddings full time for 5 years, and I've moved my business from New York to Los Angeles, and my 5 years were up and I never won that rangefinder 30. I was visiting New York, taking a few meetings, and then I was going out to Rhode Island to shoot the wedding of close friends. My brother-in-law was their officiant, my sister was their adult flower girl, so we rented a car together and drove out from New York to Newport. I had gotten a call that morning from the amazing wedding planner, Jove Meyer, telling me that I had booked the Knot Dream Wedding, which was actually the last time the Knot did a dream wedding. And I was ecstatic. And I just remember feeling so elated, like, oh my gosh, have I finally made it? Am I here? And then like literally that same exact day, I got an email from Rangefinder that I had won their annual wedding photography competition. To me, this was like the Oscar of wedding photographies, and it came with a $2,000 cash prize. I was like, okay, so like maybe I never got the 30, but oh my gosh, I got this. And I went into our friend's rehearsal dinner that night buzzing with energy. I felt amazing. I was like, I'm on top of this world and I'm going to take this in and let this moment be mine. But you want to know what else happened that very same day? Later that night, my sister won an Emmy. You heard that right. She won a goddamn Emmy. Seriously, I could not write this better if I tried. She actually won an Emmy that same night. And now, of course, I am so proud of her. She is an amazing film and television producer, and I was so excited and so proud of her. Amazing. But you want to know what people have heard of? An Emmy. You want to know what people haven't heard of? A rangefinder award. So all of a sudden, this thing that I was so excited about felt so trivial and meaningless. And that's the thing about external validation and wanting to be the best. There is always going to be someone else achieving more, earning more, looking shinier than you. And you know what? That's great for them, but their shine doesn't dull yours. So if you only care about being the shiniest, you're always just going to feel dull. Now, I wish I could say that I came to this more enlightened and healthy view on life all on my own. But as most of our big moments of growth stem from, it came out of necessity during a very dark time in my life when I started experiencing some major health challenges. It's so easy to look at someone's life from the outside and think that everything is perfect and wonderful and glamorous and easy. But Let me tell you, it hardly ever is. And that's one of the reasons I really wanted to start this podcast and talk about what happens behind the frame, behind the scenes, behind that curtain. Because back in 2017, when from the outside I looked like I was killing it, I was pretty miserable. And I was working so hard that I felt like I was killing myself. I had had back pain since I was a child, but I never thought much of it. And I thought it was normal to like be a 10-year-old with chronic back issues. And I'd never like really been sick. I'd had a few instances of the past, like chronically twisting my ankle. I dislocated my knee out of nowhere in 2015, and I had that chronic back and shoulder pain, but it was nothing crazy. Then all of a sudden in 2017, I started having such intense leg pain that some days I could hardly walk. And I went to the doctor and nothing was broken and they couldn't really figure it out. And it got worse and worse. And it was spreading to the point where I felt like my foot was broken and I could hardly walk on it. And my lower back and hip just like ached all the time. And I was really good at compartmentalization and I was able to run off adrenaline and Advil on wedding days. I never missed a single job. But in between each job, I was bedridden. I was in and out of doctor's offices and hospitals. At one point, I even had a handicap sign that I was using on weekdays. And then I was like getting all my courage together and I was shooting all weekend. And I was desperately trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And the pain was only getting worse and worse. And during this time, I received a lot of wrong diagnoses, and I did multiple treatments that not only didn't help, they made things worse. One doctor diagnosed me with spinal stenosis and wanted to do major spinal surgery that never sat right with me. Another thought it was piriformis syndrome, and we actually did a treatment, and it left me paralyzed from the waist down for 3 days. And that procedure was originally scheduled for just before the not dream wedding, but being the responsible business owner I am, I was like, I'm going to move this, even though it has zero side effects. I've been told, just in case anything goes wrong, I'm going to move it to a time where I don't have anything. And thank God I did, because I was literally wheelchair bound at home for multiple days after it because something went wrong. I went to doctor after doctor after doctor trying to figure out what was actually going on. Till about like 8 months into this insane pain, I was at a neurologist's office and I dropped my pen. I bent down to pick it up and he asked me, "Hey, are you hypermobile?" I had never heard that term before, but I was like, "I'm pretty flexible. Is that the same thing?" And he asked me if I'd ever heard of the term Ehlers-Danlos, and my life changed. The world around me like shifted on its axis. I had a diagnosis and everything started to make sense. But it wasn't an easy diagnosis for which there was a cure. It was the diagnosis of a genetic connective tissue disorder that I could manage, but no cure. And I'd already done irreparable damage to my right hip. And later I figured out my left shoulder and they both like to subluxate, which was a fancy new vocab term that I learned. I had never heard it before, but apparently I'd actually been experiencing it quite often. And a subluxation is when a bone partially dislocates and pops back in. Yes, it is painful. And it's happened to me on wedding days. And I didn't even know that it was happening. I just thought I was like going into spasm and shooting through it because that's what we do. And I'm going to be honest, this is really scary for me to share publicly. There's so many voices in my head being like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing this? You're never going to work again. So my knee-jerk reaction to sharing this is immediately to follow it up by saying, this has never affected my performance on a wedding day. I've never missed a shot. I've literally had my shoulder subluxate during a hora, wait till it's over, strap on an ice pack, and I'm back to shooting toast 5 seconds later. Because just like anything else in life, I've learned to live with it and have been lucky that it hasn't held me back. But I know that even like feeling the need to like word vomit, all of that comes from the need to appear superhuman and like a machine. But you know what? This is hard for me to say, but I am not a machine. I am a human being, and we all are. We all need to take care of our bodies because we only get one in this life. And if you break it, you're stuck with it. And I say that as someone with this very broken body that I love very much. Even on the days when I simultaneously hate it very much, two opposing thoughts can exist at once. After years of physical therapy, many doctors, constant research, I joke I need to have a doctorate to exist in my own skin. I figured out how to manage all of this and how to still kick ass at my job. But it does mean that I take fewer jobs, I schedule rest time, I'm diligent about having my assistant help with my gear and always doing my physical therapy, even the way I hold my cameras. But like most humans, when forced, I was adaptable and I found out how to make it work for me. But for about a year there, When I was searching for all of those answers and figuring it out, I had in the back of my head the entire time that my career might be over. I thought everything I had worked so hard for so long just kind of was falling apart just when it was like starting to come to fruition. And there's nothing quite like that existential angst to knock some sense into your head and make you reevaluate everything. All of a sudden, it didn't really seem to matter so much if I wasn't on this list or I was never on that cover. I just wanted to do what I loved so badly, and I was so scared that it was about to be taken away from me. I realized how much I truly loved what I do and how much joy it brought me and how little that other stuff mattered. It's a cliche that immense pressure makes diamonds out of coal, but what can I say? Cliches are there for a reason. There is nothing like immense pressure to crystallize what matters most. And in those moments, I wasn't sad about not getting on a list, not getting on a cover. I was devastated at the thought of not getting to shoot anymore. And that felt overwhelmingly sad. Not getting that email from a client thanking me for their images and telling me what they meant to them, that was an immeasurable loss. Luckily, I found the right specialist and I learned to be my own advocate and figure out how to manage everything. And I got back to doing what I love, which was shooting weddings. And I came back to it with this newfound love and appreciation for it because I'd almost lost it. It's sad that it sometimes takes these major life-changing events to make us reevaluate our goals and our choices, but often we only do it when we're forced. And that was the universe's way of kicking me in the butt and forcing me to do so. So if you need to reevaluate some things, let me be that force telling you to think about what matters most to you. If things were taken away from you, what would you miss? Now, I'd love to say that I was magically cured of imposter syndrome and my need for external validation, but I've already spoiled the plot and told you earlier that 3 years after this big revelation, I sat crying in my therapist's office with a copy of Martha Stewart Wedding's annual edition. And this time I was double angry at myself because not only was I sad that I didn't feel like enough, I was so mad that 3 years later, I had done all of this work on myself to prioritize internal versus external validation. And I was like, I am so much better than this. Why am I still feeling this way? And you know what? I'm human. I'm not perfect. And we need to stop judging ourselves for judging ourselves. Like, let's all strive to stop using external validation as our goal markers and start caring more about what actually makes us happy. But you know what? If you slip up, that's okay. Gentle parent yourself. Talk to yourself the way you would a child and be kind. Trust me, judging yourself for judging yourself just makes it so much worse. And present day me talking to you in 2024, I still struggle with this. I wish I could say this all was in the past and I'm an enlightened superhuman, but I'm not. I'm a normal human and I still deal with all these same insecurities and anxieties as everyone else. The pandemic hit me really hard. I'm immunocompromised and I didn't work for over a year. I worked on my education and I developed my Weddings 101 and 201 programs and I met my amazing husband. So I'm so grateful that I had the time and space to do those things. But I still deal with the anxiety of feeling left behind and feeling irrelevant, feeling like I'm not doing enough, like I'm not enough. So if you feel that way too, know that you're not alone. The trick is to not let those feelings win. Remember that there is no such thing as quote unquote enough. You are forever inching your own goalpost further away, and it's so slow you don't even notice it's happening. So stop waiting for someone to tell you that you're enough and say it to yourself right now, just as you are. Now, I've already been talking for what like feels like forever. And this whole idea can be its own episode. But it's really important to me to share this idea with you guys now in January because I know we're all making our goals for the new year. And this idea changed my life. So I encourage you guys to start separating out the idea of a goal and a mechanism for achieving it. So being on the best of list isn't a goal, it's a mechanism. It's something that builds brand equity and it falls into your marketing and branding categories of your client acquisition apparatus. So it can help you bring in a certain type of client or charge a certain price. But that's the goal, the client or the money or the self-fulfillment of shooting it. Maybe the goal is to put down a down payment on your house or pay your child's tuition or take an amazing vacation. That's the goal. And being in a certain publication or redoing your website or hiring PR, those are mechanisms, those are ways of achieving it. The goal is what we put on top of our mountain, and then we get up that mountain by using our various mechanisms. So I highly recommend taking the time to think about your headspace and reframing the way you approach your goals in your business. Confusing a goal and a mechanism of achieving that goal only leads to unfulfillment and never feeling like you're enough. And sometimes the mechanisms you think you need, you actually really don't. For the longest time, I was convinced that I couldn't charge this amount if I wasn't on a certain list. And I found out that I was going to be on that list in June, and I raised my prices. But it wasn't announced publicly that I was actually on that list until the following January. It's like 7 months later. And in that time, I had booked my entire season at a higher price point without anyone knowing that I was on that list. So sometimes we just really need that mental strength and courage to say I'm worth it, because guess what? You probably already are. And that's where I really want to leave you today, with this idea of reminding yourself that you're enough, because that's what I'm going to be doing over here on repeat over and over and over again, just in case I forget again. And I hope you'll join me. And I also hope that you'll join me back here in a month. I wanted to release this little preview of the pod to start off the year in January and hopefully help a few of you start the year off with a slightly different mindset than you plan to. And I will be back at the end of February with weekly episodes. It'll be a mix of solo ones like this and ones where I invite all kinds of fun guests from all different parts of the industry. And we're going to talk about their journeys and what's going on behind the scenes of their picture perfect portfolios. So stay tuned, and I hope you'll join me back here in a month. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed listening to my first episode, let me know. I'm super nervous. I hope you liked it. Like the podcast and subscribe. DM me on Instagram and say hi. Tell me what you want to learn more about. And if you want to keep up to date on new episodes, my educational offerings, and fun freebies, be sure to sign up for my newsletter. And you can grab the link to that in the show notes. And if you're a wedding photographer listening in, I am opening up my Weddings 201 Masterclass mentorship program once again on January 30th. And admission will only be open for 1 week, and I'd love to have you join me. If what I spoke about resonated with you and you're looking for like all of that infrastructure and hard skills to create those mechanisms for achieving your specific goals, then I hope you'll consider checking out my Weddings 201 program in the show notes and you'll join us. There's only 20 spots available, so if you're interested, grab your spot quick. Thank you once again for joining me. I hope my story resonated with you, or at the very least, it was comically entertaining. Have a great day.